Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to part 3 of our PIR series for 2021, which is going to focus on changes to the disabilities module. I said for the past couple presentations that it was going to be short and sweet, and of course, it ended up taking much longer than that, but I'm glad that I got a chance to answer questions because I feel like people are a lot clearer on what we need to do than they were when we started, so that's kind of rewarding. In this case, however, I really do think there's only a few new fields that were added, and I think most people will actually be familiar with them. But I do want to make sure that we get through this and everyone's aware of the changes that were made and what we have to do, and then cover any questions. So during the presentation, all the attendees are going to be on mute. You can type your questions in the question box as part of your dashboard, and we will get to the question. We might stop at some points in the middle, but we'll get to the questions at the end if we don't beforehand. So having said that, I'm going to start. The goal of this training is to help everybody update and complete the disability records so that we can have a provisional PIR ready at the end of the month to satisfy our funders and to increase knowledge of how to enter disabilities correctly in COPA in general to help us with the monitoring and reporting activities. So we've got two key objectives here: to be able to enter the information so that it populates the PIR, and to increase everyone's familiarity with the new PIR, with the new disability section in the child file, which is going to improve reporting both to HHS, but also for PFA and PI to ISB. So we're going to take a look at those fields and make sure we're all on the same page in terms of what needs to be entered and tracked. So the key takeaway points are our grant period this year is ending June 30th. And although, the PIR every year is due as a report on August 31st, a period upon which we are reporting ends June 30th. So we're going to be reporting data as of that point, meaning that what we really need to do is get point in time information out of COPA at the end of the month. And by and large, that is what we're going to report, not subsequent services, which are going to be part of a different grant cycle, and we'll have a different number. And thus, technically, we should be on a different PIR. The federal report has changed since the last time we reported, and as a result, there are new fields in COPA to address the new fields in the federal reporting. And what that means to you is that existing child disability records are not up to date. So anything that you put in more than, say, a month ago is missing some information now because there was nowhere to put that information before recently. So a little bit of background for those of you who are new to the PIR or who need a refresher since we did not report it last year. The Office of Head Start PIR provides comprehensive data on services, staff, children, and families served by Head Start and Early Head Start programs. Grantees and delegates are required to submit PIRs for Head Start and Early Head Start programs, and I would point out separately. So each of those receives its own report. You have 3 grants, you have 3 reports to submit. So we report one for each delegate agency, but also for each program within that: Head Start, Early Head Start Childcare Partnership, and our expansion grant. Primarily, the responses that are put into the report come from COPA, and then we put that ourselves into a form on the Head Start Enterprise System website. The PIR was not reported last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you'll remember a year ago today, we were just starting to reopen some sites after having been closed for several months, and HHS communicated that a report was not required last year, and we did not submit one. So the last time we submitted a PIR was August of 2019, and a lot of things have changed since then. So most of the data that we pull for the PIR is available in COPA if you're using the program to monitor your operations and services and entering everything as the year goes through. We can just pull it out at the end of the year. However, there are certain areas in which we had significant gaps in information. Those were human resources, family services, and disabilities. The first two webinars I conducted last week, if you did not see them, we sent out information with CSD updates, and those are available online, both the PowerPoint presentation and also those webinars were recorded and posted online. This webinar as well, after we're done today, we will post it online and we will send out the PowerPoint presentation to everybody as PDF. So section C of the PIR, the new PIR is report 999F in COPA. You can see the changes if you want to by loading the old report, which is just 999. You'll see that the differences in some of the questions and the way the information is organized. So section C reports on child and family services and outcomes, including health status, developmental screenings, and disabilities. It also has the family information in the same section. So here we're looking at PIR section C. The disability services section starts with new information. It's C21 through C24 are questions about child disability services. And the first two, C21 and C22, are new items, and they are requesting information on children who were referred for evaluation for IEP or IFSP services. Now, even though this is the first time this information has appeared on the PIR, many of you will be familiar with it because, as those of you who have been here for a while know, after we report the PIR, it's necessary for us as a grantee to submit a waiver request covering all the delegates who did not reach the 10% goal or of having 10% of the children be children with disabilities. So when we submit that request, the regional office asks us for certain pieces of data, and these are exactly the pieces of data that are now on the PIR. So they ask us how many kids were referred for evaluation, how many children who were referred received an evaluation, how many of those were diagnosed, and for those who did not receive an evaluation, why not? So, and again, and they ask for like a statistical breakdown of those questions, and here it is on the PIR. So while there's a little bit more work to do up front now, the process of submitting a waiver, should we need one, will be much simpler than it was in 2019 and before, because we will already have reported that data, and presumably they won't ask for it again. So OHS has provided guidance for the new items. This is taken directly from the Head Start Enterprise System. So the children may be determined eligible to receive services and related services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So that's why everything in the new report is now labeled IDEA. Report on children referred to an evaluation to determine eligibility during the program year in questions C21 to C22. And the program year, just to remind everyone, began September 8th, 2020. So immediately after the rollover from last year, and it means the first day of school in CPS always aligns with the beginning of our program year. So when we're reporting new referrals, we're reporting on referrals made on or after the first day of classes in CPS during the current, now just ending school year. And report on children determined to be eligible to receive these services in questions C23 and C24, regardless of when the determination was made. That means that C23 and C24 that IEP and IFSP questions are still referring to all children and not just children who were referred during this program year. So the numbers that we report under C21 are going to be derived from the Disabilities tab in a child record. Some of you have been a little put off by the fact that COPA's interface has changed. They did this to make the pages load easier on mobile devices as more and more people move towards accessing the system in that way. So still at the top section, there is an icon that looks like a pencil right next to where it says child disability. And when you click that, you can open and edit the entire field for each child. So 2 steps are required to report a child on item C21. You need to do 2 things correctly in order for that child to show up on the report. The first one is where it says child is referred for an evaluation to determine IDEA eligibility. That must be marked yes. That part makes sense, and most people have been doing that. But the second part is a new field that was just added to COPA a matter of weeks ago, and that is the referred date. And a date must be entered that falls within the bounds of the current program year. Again, that means after September 8th. And any child who has a date after September 8th in that field will show up on item C21. So if you look at the new PIR in COPA now, you will probably see no one reported on that line, and that's because the referred date is a new field. And so if the last time the record was added or updated was prior to May 2021, it doesn't have a date because there wasn't anywhere to put it. Okay. So the next item, C21A, is of these the number who received an evaluation. To populate that, you must answer yes or no as to whether the child received an evaluation this year. So, and this is a subset of the C21 data. So again, if they didn't have a referral date in the system, they won't show up on this line either. So if you enter a child and they did not receive an evaluation, you need to select a reason from the list. And you'll notice one of the reasons is other. If you're going to put other in here, please populate the blank field provided and tell me what other means. Because when we submit any, and this goes for any item in the PIR, if there's an other option, then we at the grantee need to fill in the field on the federal report that says, what does other mean? So you can't skate like that. You need to tell us when we have the other. Why? If that means that the child was evaluated and determined to not need services, then please, populate that in the system. So here's a good question, and it's right on the screen. So we'll go through this right now. If the child has not been evaluated but is scheduled for summer assessment, then you pick the item that is highlighted right here when I was going through and putting in the fake sample data, which is evaluation is pending and not yet completed by responsible agency. So we will, because we're doing that as of an earlier date, we'll be putting that in a lot. So we just need to, again, document that, and we will explain that then in our general comments. We will say the process is ongoing. The local education authority offers summer screening alternatives, which are underway, but we're not, screenings were not completed as of the submission of this report at the end of the grant period. Something like that. So they give the following options here. And so I wanted to go through and make sure everybody could look at them for a minute, because I didn't know what the first one meant either when I first came up. So the first option is responsible agency assigned the child to a response intervention. And this is a thing that happens with elementary school children. It's not very common in the birth to 5 world. So probably this is not the response. So then we have a particular line for parents who refuse evaluation, and then evaluation is pending and not completed. That pretty much covers why a child did not receive one. But mostly it's either the parents refused or it hasn't happened yet, but will. But if there's another reason, again, please specify that in the comments, and we will then be able to put together compile a list of that and complete that text field on the report. Now you'll notice as you go through this section, there is a more detailed set of reasons, and these are reasons not for not receiving an evaluation, but for not receiving services with a LEA public school. Please fill these out as well if this is the case, because we will also, although this doesn't directly feed the PIR, we will also use this information to compile, again, the reasons that we cite in the text version of the report, the comments field on the grantee report. And also we do use this data for other reporting. We compile it as well. We have reports that we give to the state, to CPS as the LEA, to ISB, and so on. So it is important to complete all of the sections, even if it does seem like we're asking the same question slightly different way multiple times. That's probably because it is required for different reports to different funders. So the remaining questions will be populated based on the IEP, IFSP, and services fields below the IDEA section in the child disability record. So we will ask you to please complete those fields. Even the questions that aren't directly related to PIR items are related to other funding sources, and we do need to report disabilities information to the state as well as the feds. So we need everybody to put this in. We need, particularly anything that's a date, we need the start date, and we need those to be current to be able to decide who is included and who is not included on various reports. So C23 is the report on Head Start children, so those are not populated in an early Head Start report. And C24 is for IFSP. It's on the early Head Start report and is not populated for Head Start. So that piece is pulled primarily from the primary disability area at the top of the disabilities page. So when we need these to be populated, anybody that has a IEP or IFSP does have a professional diagnosis, so that should say yes. And then we need to have that initial diagnosis date to determine whether it was during this program year or during a previous program year. And I have an interesting question, which is, can you check off more than one response as to why children are not receiving services? I'll have to admit, I have not tested that option. Some of these, the way that some of these menus is presented has changed with the update to the interface, and that's certainly possible, although I don't know that it should be, because even though more than one reason might apply, when we have to report, often we have a head count under each item that should add up to the total. So we don't want to count a child twice, even if that would be factually accurate, because it makes the report not work, in the sense that then we'll be receiving different questions as to why it doesn't add up from our funders. Okay, so So IEP and IFSP dates, we do need these to be populated. So you notice at the top there is a diagnosis date and then a line where you say that you have an IEP, but we still need you to scroll down the rest of the screen and put in what the IEP and IFSP dates. Not only that, we need to keep them current. So if you put in the initial set last year and that expiration date has now passed and their IEP was renewed for another year, you do need to go back into the page and update the system. So this has become a problem recently. We've had people contacting us asking why children aren't showing up on their early Head Start PIR as having received an IFSP. These are children who have turned 3 and often have been transitioned into a Head Start classroom. So once that's happened, if their current status is no longer IFSP, but they belong on the report because their previous status was IFSP, the system is going to check and make sure that IFSP was current at some point during the program year. So if you look at the sample here, I just used today's date going backwards. So here we have one that expired on June 14th, 2019. That was during the 2019 to 2020 program year. And so this child would not show up on an early Head Start PIR. Now, if they were still enrolled and they were in early Head Start into the current program year and they wanted them to show up on the PIR, those IFSP dates would have to be updated so that part of that period is within the current year. Okay. And then we've got item C25, which provides a breakout of primary diagnoses and services, and this is for Head Start children with IEPs only. These fields will populate if the primary condition broad category field in the child's IEP section is populated, and then the dates for receiving services are within the current program year. So again, you make sure that all of that is filled out, and it should populate correctly on the PIR. Again, you may see in some cases the number receiving services is not equal to the number that we're determined to have a disability, and in many cases that is accurate, meaning that they've been given an IEP, but services will not start until school begins in the fall, and that's fine. We'll just make sure that you make a note of that in the child's file, and we will compile that, and we'll note the number of children who are in that situation when we report. So I can always tell when people logged in late. This is why I wait a few minutes before I start going. So I have another question. Will we receive a copy of the PowerPoint? And again, yes, that is the first thing I always say when I start these. So when people are asking that, I know that you weren't listening. We see if there are multiple reasons a child was not getting services, could you potentially report as other and specify all the reasons in the field? One of the things we're looking to do moving forward with our information systems is actually get rid of other as much as possible. I know you really want to have it as accurate as possible, but if you've got multiple valid reasons, I would pick the most important one, because again, all we're trying to do with the report is give kind of a line item readout on why children are not receiving services. So if one of them is the same as a number of children and the other is unique, I would put the unique reason in so that it gets counted on the report. But in general, we're just trying to get a breakout of why, and it's simple. It's boiled down because it's not. I mean, when we were making reports, for the most part, We're not sharing, and funders aren't all that interested in seeing individual child data. What they're looking at is overall statistics, trends, and patterns of need. Okay. So again, in terms of making sure that people are counted as receiving services, make sure that they give dates for any of the things that apply in here. So some of the categories that are broken out are the service plan, implementation plan dates, occupational therapy, physical therapy, educational therapy. There's lines for all of these, including the 504 plan, which means they don't have an IEP, but they're still being provided certain services. We do get asked about that as well. So if that is the case, and you are providing enhanced services for a child, even though they were not determined as eligible for an IEP, please do note that on the file so that, again, we can get a count of children who are receiving services that are not formally IEP services. Okay, in this section, if the child had an IFSP and now has an IEP, should I be leaving the diagnosis eligibility determination for the IFSP or enter a new date for the IEP? That's only one I had not thought of mentioning, but yes, if the child now has an IEP, well, you need to change the diagnosis eligibility date to refer to the eligibility date for the IEP. And the reason for that is that that's the date it looks at to decide whether an IEP was developed during this program year or prior to this program year. So for all children who are enrolled who turned 3 during this program year, they should be counted as having an eligibility determination made during this program year because no one was determined as eligible for an IEP when they were younger than 3. So all of those kids should count there, which means that if you have moved a child up from early Head Start to Head Start and they have an IEP, the new date should be included. And again, they should still show up on the early Head Start PIR if that's the case, as long as you have IFSP dates entered and their previous disability status field is entered as IFSP. And Gina wants to know if the RTI option can be removed. It can't, because that's one of the options that is on the federal PIR. So some of these responses and fields we have included because we're given a report to fill out. Again, as I mentioned before, though, that RTI is almost certainly not you, because here we're in Chicago. That's more of an older thing in birth to 5 children, especially those who are not being served in a public school setting, probably don't have one of those. So I doubt any of you are going to use it. Let me see. Okay, so good question. How do you correct children with an IFSP who were on your agency's PIR 999 report and now are not showing up on the 999F and are no longer attending your agency? That is something for which you would have to contact myself or Jennifer, and we will hunt it down, assuming that there was IFSP information documented in there. The situation is probably just that their previous status field has not been filled out, and we can just go in and update that, and then they should show up. Most of the time, if a child who used to have an IFSP and used to be in early Head Start with you and now has aged out of the program is not showing up, that's it. They changed the current disability status to something other than IFSP because the IFSP is no longer valid for a 3-year-old, but they haven't put the previous status in. So we can probably fix that very quickly. Just let us know who that child is. If a child with an IFSP in early Head Start receives an IEP before being moved into a Head Start classroom, while entering the IEP, cancel the IFSP counted for EHS. Again, you need to have two things to have a child who no longer has an IFSP currently show up on the report. One of them is that they have to have IFSP dates that overlap into the current program year. So make sure that your end date for the IFSP services is after September 8th, 2020. And the second thing is that since their current status is no longer IFSP, their previous status must be populated to indicate that they previously had an IFSP. This is tricky. If a child had an IFSP transitioning 3-year-old moves to Head Start with an IEP and shows up on the EHS PIR and Head Start PIR, then they will be counted twice and the 10% will be inaccurate. Well, that's true, but that is not really our responsibility. We just need to report those things accurately. The feds add the two PIRs together for the same agency for those early Head Start children under the base grant to get one single 10% number. And like some other fields, that creates some interesting data. For example, for a long time, we reported for each PIR, they asked how many LEAs are in the service area, and we would put 1, just CPS, for every PIR. And so then we would look at the citywide numbers that we got back from the feds. And I remember one year we submitted 71 separate reports, and indeed, it said there were 71 LEAs in Chicago. So those kinds of errors are made by the feds with regard to PIR, but it's kind of out of our hands. Is the special education eligibility date the same as IEP services began? It's written that way. Yes, it's going to be the most recent determination of eligibility. So if the child has an IEP, that would be the IEP date. If the child has an IFSP, that would be the IFSP date. So I've had a couple questions here about how we're presenting the, how we're calculating the 10%. The answer is we're not. HHS is. We're reporting our total enrollment, our funded enrollment, and the number of children served this year with an IEP or IFSP, and HHS is going to calculate that based on the information that we submit, and they will do it however they want. And that's the real unvarnished truth. So when we're submitting the PIR, we've got cumulative enrollment. So we've got a count of how many children were served this year, and then we've got a count of how many IEPs or IFSPs there were. And so generally speaking, the feds will take the one number and divide it by the other number and get a percentage. Now, in the past, our regional office has been using the funded enrollment, meaning that if we funded a site for 20 slots, then they were looking to see if there were 2 and 2 children counted as 10%. But my understanding is that they're looking at the cumulative enrollment this year, meaning how many children were actually enrolled since September 8th in the program. That does make it more difficult to make the 10%. From the grantee perspective, since we're all not going to make it either way, and we will have to submit a waiver, That's not, I don't know, I'm not unduly concerned about it. But we will need to keep track of that and submit a waiver probably for everyone who hasn't reached 10% of cumulative. But as I mentioned before, if we do this correctly and include this information on the PIR, we will be answering many of the questions that they typically turn around and ask us, so that the preparation process may be less painful. But that is, that does make it a little bit more difficult for us to reach that goal. Okay. So I think I really did manage to not take up too much of your time this time. Third time, I guess, is the charm. So here's my contact information. You have any additional questions about this, send me an email. I'll try to get through them in the next couple of days. There's a lot going on here, but I'll do my best to get back to you. We will be sending out this PowerPoint. If not before, we will be doing a CSD update on Wednesday and getting the information out to everyone at that point. We will also be, we have recorded this presentation, and once we're done, we can convert and download it. So it will take probably a few hours before we can do anything else with it because of that. But once we have it, we will be posting it to our YouTube channel, which is where all of the previous ones are located as well. So if you keep an eye on that, you should be able to watch this again if you so desire, hopefully by the end of the day. So thank you very much for participating, and I'm hopeful that we can compile this quickly and then have much less to worry about later in the summer, which we will all be grateful for. So thanks a lot for your time, and I'll be in touch.